Our next witness is Annette.
Annette, sir.
Annette, please.
Please state your full name.
Mrs. Annette Hill Stewart.
Take the book in your raised hand and repeat after me. I swear by Almighty God
I swear by Almighty God
that the evidence I shall give
that the evidence I shall give
shall be the truth,
shall be the truth,
the whole truth,
the whole truth,
and nothing but the
and
truth.
nothing but the truth.
If you want to help yourself to some water before we start,
Oh,
it's
thank
just
you.
in front of you. Annette, you're here to tell us about your late husband, Angus Jr. You met him through work in 1998.
I did.
What was his work at that time?
He was a horologist.
And you've given us two pictures of
Can I explain what a
him.
horologist is? Because not many people would know.
Of course.
His profession was actually manufacturing and making watches, old-fashioned watches.
And you've given us two pictures of
I have.
Angus that you'd like up during your evidence. The first of which is 1001-013, please, of him at his workbench. And the second, 1001-019. And you've described this photo as how you want to remember Angus.
I do.
We'll keep that photo up during your evidence.
I did actually have a photograph that I asked to be shown 10 days before he died, actually.
We'll
So
come to
if
that
you
as well.
could send that,
Absolutely.
please.
Yeah, we will come back to that
Thank you.
a little bit later. When you met Angus, you were aware that he had von Willebrand's disease.
We were friends at first. We'd worked at, I'm in the watch business myself, and we'd met previously, and then we met again, and we became good friends, and the rest is history. But yes, I knew before we entered into a full relationship that he had haemophilia. Yes.
What was your understanding of how much it affected him on a day-to-day basis?
Not at all. Angus was a guy larger than life. He walked into a room and held a presence. He was very tall and fit and handsome, magnetic personality. And that's why I fell in love with him. But it was very apparent that he wasn't a sickly person. Now and again he would have nosebleeds, and sometimes at work, but that was it.
You married in 2001. Can you tell us what your life together was like at that time?
We were a couple who'd just got married, had a wonderful wedding in Scotland, and we bought a house. Angus loved his home, I did too. We were real home birds. And we had a fabulous life. We were joined together at the hip, wherever he went, I went, and vice versa. He wasn't a football man that would watch football at the weekend or go out with his friends, and the same with me. We just always wanted to spend time together. We love cooking, we love travelling, we love playing golf, we love bicycling, walking, and we worked hard. We both were ambitious people at that time, and we both worked very hard, and from that we managed to buy a beautiful house and lovely holidays, and it was wonderful. It's a cliche to say he was my best friend, but he was.
Now, you obviously didn't know Angus when he was infected with hepatitis C, but since he died, you've obtained his medical records and talked to family a lot about what happened.
Mm.
From 1978, when he was 13, he was treated at the Royal Free Hospital under Dr. Kernoff, and he had recurrent nosebleeds. Your understanding is that he was usually treated with cryoprecipitate. Is that right?
Correct.
Please, can we have document 1001-003, please? It's a handwritten entry in the notes. It's 003 at the second page, please, Paul. There's an entry on the 28th of November 1980, and I'll read it out because it's not entirely clear on the screen. It says, treated today with cryo times 10 for epistasis, developed a moderately severe transfusion reaction, generalised erythema, urticaria and rigor, which was aborted with hydrocortisone. Piriton had been given before infusion. All future treatment should be changed to NHS factor 8 concentrate, and that is underlined. Try 700 units in the first instance, and it goes on to require liver function tests before treatment and weekly liver function tests for 8 weeks after the first infusion. If we look at the bottom of the page, there is then a note from the 1st of December 1980, which records that Angus had further nosebleeds and that he was treated with Lister 8. And thereafter was to have liver function tests. And if we look at 1001-006, please, we have a list of treatments that Angus had, and we can see in the list the 1st of December 1980 is the first time that factor 8 concentrate is given. From your discussions with Angus before he died and with his family, were they ever warned of any risks involved in him changing to factor 8?
No.
Was there any discussion with them about making that change?
No.
If we look again at this document on the screen, we can see that Angus was given factor 8 on 4 occasions, and then on the 13th of October 1982, his treatment changed to DDAVP. Having looked at these records and other parts of Angus's medical records, you're concerned about whether Angus was used as a guinea pig and why he was ever given factor 8.
Correct.
Can you explain to us what that concern is and why?
Yes, I had a concern, which I was obviously going to view today, but in light of what my brother-in-law has given as evidence this morning, my husband was patient number 19, and he was knowingly, by the clinicians, but not by Angus Hoy himself, given a product that they knew was contaminated. And it seems to be that was for some type of clinical trial, or I'm not sure. I would like to know more about that document. It was the first time I knew about that today.
But even before you saw that document this morning in Mark's evidence, were concerned even then?
Even then.
Can you explain what your concern was then?
It was very clear. Angus was given factor 8 initially in December 1980, and by then it was very, very clear that factor 8 was contaminated. It wasn't heat treated, and it would cause infections. And indeed, there was a verbal interview given by Christine Lee, I believe in June 2015, when she said can't recall the specific time, but they knew that giving patients factor 8, 100% of them would be infected by hepatitis C.
In your statement, your particular concern was also about Angus's father, Angus Senior. In your statement, you said that at the same time as Angus Junior was changed to factor 8, Angus Senior was also changed to factor 8.
I think it was a matter of a week between the two.
And both Anguses were said to have had a transfusion reaction.
Yeah, out of the blue. Yeah, my Angus Junior, had successfully been given cryoprecipitate for many years, and he'd never, ever had a reaction to it. And then all of a sudden he has a reaction to cryoprecipitate. Now, there is a line in his medical record stating, Angus had a reaction to this. I'd like to know, what was the reaction? Did they investigate it? What caused it? there was nothing else pertaining to why all of a sudden he became allergic to cryoprecipitate. And as it happens, I have seen some of Angus Senior's medical records, and it's exactly the same. All of a sudden, his father became allegedly allergic to cryoprecipitate too.
And you're also concerned in your statement about why DDAVP wasn't used instead of factor VIII.
Correct. It was readily available, and Angus was treated with it after being given factor VIII 4 times and successfully. So I'm quizzed, and I would like to know why he was all of a sudden given factor VIII. But as I say, going back to the evidence I've heard this morning, to me there was a reason behind it, and it was due to some sort of medical investigation.
Another aspect of your concerns arise from a letter in Angus's medical records that you came across from July 1994, and it's 1001-011, please, Paul. And if we can start on page 2 of it. This part of it is a fax from the sales operations manager of Hoxton about Hemate P. And it says this, it's from the 14th of July 1994. You'll be aware of the close scrutiny that is applied to blood products and those where human blood is used in their manufacture. Hemate P has been prepared from large pools of human plasma non-reactive for hepatitis B surface antigen. However, such plasma may contain one or more causative agents of chronic hepatitis. Hemate P is heated to 60 degrees centigrade for 10 hours in solution form. Nevertheless, no procedure has been shown to be totally effective in removing hepatitis infectivity from anti-haemophilia factor. And it goes on to say that Hemate P is usually available in the United Kingdom after testing by the National Institute of Biological Standards and Control as required by our full product licence. Therefore, any material not tested by NIBSC cannot be covered by our product licence and is only available for use on a named patient basis. We therefore request you sign the attached letter and return it to say you fully understand the conditions under which we are making this particular supply of Hemate P available to you. And if we go back to the first page, there is then a letter from the doctor to the sales operation manager indicating that he had read and noted the contents, and I understand that as such this particular supply of Hemate P is not covered by your product licence, and I accept responsibility for the use of this product in the therapy of these patients.
It's nice of him.
As far as you're aware, was Angus ever told that the Hemate P he was being given was unlicensed?
No.
Was he ever told that the doctor accepted full responsibility for the use of the product?
No, and of course this is my understanding from Angus, who's not here to obviously represent himself, and also his mother, and it was very clear that he was never informed of that.
Going back to 1981, please can we have document 1001-004, please? We have here the record of the doses that had been given to Angus on the 27th of February 1981 in that entry. There's the note that doses of NHS concentrate on the 1st of December 1980 and the 20th of January 1981. AST followed prospectively, and that it became abnormal on the 20th of January 1981. And then if we look at... Sorry, sir, can I just have one moment? Yes. And if we look at the bottom of that page, There's an entry from the 11th of December 1981 which flags that there was a flare-up of symptoms around the 23rd of November 1981. And what your concern is if we go over the page, we have an entry from Angus Senior's medical records at the bottom of the page, 11th of December 1981, which is exactly the same as the entry in your Angus's medical records. And you say in your statement you're rather concerned that there are identical records in the two individual patients' records of what was going on.
How can you have two separate patients with exactly the same comments? That's my question.
As far as you're aware, do you know which Angus, if either of them, had a flare-up of symptoms at that time?
Well, I have no idea.
And the family can't work it out?
No, none of us can. And indeed, actually, it actually looks like this was, obviously we're going back a long time ago before computers, and also to note that the haemophilia centres always keep they're only, what I know of, the only departments in the hospital that keep their patients' records, which is very handy for them. It looks like this entry has been cut and paste, like a piece of paper over the top of it, which concerns me too, because I didn't get the originals, I had scans. So I couldn't look and then investigate that any further.
When you met Angus, and when you got together with Angus, he told you he had hepatitis C.
It wasn't until we entered into a relationship that he told me that I had hepatitis C.
He also said to you that he felt there was a delay between his being diagnosed with hepatitis C and when he was actually told about it. But going back through the records, you're not entirely clear what the delay was or
No.
what was going on. But his sense was that there had been a significant delay.
Absolutely.
When you first entered a relationship with Angus, what was his understanding of how serious hepatitis C was?
At that time, not particularly serious, and it was starting to become more apparent that hepatitis C was an issue, but he just hoped, because he was a very positive man, that he wouldn't be inflicted or affected by it too much.
In your statement, you say at that point he wasn't particularly worried by it.
No, because he'd never been told that there was anything to be concerned about. You know, he hadn't been pulled in by any of the clinicians or the doctors, and you know, he didn't deem it to be too much of a problem, and he felt that if it had been, he would have been called in. He had the utmost trust at that time with his doctors and the haemophilia centre.
Can we have document 1001-023, please? It's a letter from May 92, so before the two of you were together, and it addresses the question of sexual transmission of hepatitis C. It says this: you may know we're trying to find out more about the hepatitis C virus, which many of our patients acquired during the late 1970s and early 80s, before clotting factor concentrates were sterilised. Many of our patients have been asking at their reviews if there's a risk of transmitting the virus sexually to their partners. We think that this risk is very small, but don't have enough evidence to give definite advice at present. That's 92. But by 1998, when you and Angus entered a relationship, what were you both told or understood about the risks of sexual transmission of hepatitis?
As partners, we actually at that time hadn't been into the haemophilia department to discuss this. But Angus was clearly a very caring and thoughtful and man who, before he'd met me, he'd had children, and he had asked to see the clinicians prior to him having children, to the possibilities of passing over his von Willebrands, which indeed I have to also mention was moderate, and also hepatitis. And he was never told that the hepatitis would be a problem. So when we met, we used condoms when we first met as we just started a relationship. And then, of course, as you fall in love with somebody, you don't want to do that. And Angus was clear, because we talked about it, that he was told that hepatitis could not be transmitted sexually. And, of course, I trusted and believed him. I always have.
In about 1999, you felt unwell and had a test for hepatitis C. What was the result of that?
It was positive.
And what's happened for you about hepatitis C since then?
I cleared it naturally, very fortunately.
In 2002, Angus's father, Angus Senior, died of liver cancer. How did that affect your Angus?
Oh, it killed him. He was completely devastated. His father was his mentor, and he also was in a state that actually Angus at that time he got a job that actually incorporated lots of international travel, and he was due to go to the Far East, and the clinicians had said he questioned whether he should go, and the clinicians said, it's fine, your dad will be with us for a while, and he'd only been away for 3 days, and we had to call him and ask him to come back. And indeed, he got back, I think, 2 or 3 hours too late, and his father had passed. And so not only did he struggle with the death of his dad, Angus, he also really struggled with the guilt that he wasn't there with him. He was the only member of the family. We were all there. Angus's mum, asked us to all come to the house, and we were all there when Angus Senior passed. And my Angus wasn't, and he really never forgave himself for that.
You've also said in your statement that it made you acutely aware of the potentially devastating consequences for Angus of his hepatitis C.
I think Angus saw it, not so much the hepatitis C, but just how much valuable life was. And then he considered his hepatitis C. And at that time, we started to hear in the press, and of course the inquiries and etc. and campaigns, that it was a killer. And then it was at that time that he said to me, I have a death sentence over my head. There's a time clock ticking down. I don't know when it is that it will stop, but we now really have to do something about this.
In 2005, Angus became unwell. Can you tell us about that? He was becoming more tired.
Oh, yes. Actually, because previous to that, he had been into hospital a couple of times with something else he contracted through bacteria, actually, when he was on a trip. But he began to feel more fatigued. He was terribly moody. Would, out of the blue, just start an argument, very confrontational. Never physically abusive, but verbally abusive at times. And he would be mortified afterwards. He would be really upset. And he was also very nauseous. He was actually making himself sick as well at times. And it was very clear that something wasn't right.
In his records, you found a number of entries suggesting that Angus had liver problems because he was or had been consuming excess alcohol. In the time you knew him, is that accurate?
No, not at all. I was horrified when I read that. I've never ever seen Angus with a beer in his hand, a spirit in his hand. He was not a pub visitor. He hated pubs, wine bars, nightclubs, and indeed when we used to go on holiday, we'd quite frequently fall out because I'd want to go something, special after, and he would be adamant, no, we're going back to the room by 10:30 when there would be in the most exotic location, and he wanted to go back to the room. And so in the whole time that I knew Angus, he would like a glass of wine. We'd cook together and have a glass of wine and go out for meals and have a glass of wine, but he was not the type of person that would go out drinking, not at all.
In 2006, he was treated with ribavirin and interferon.
Sorry, can I just go back to the cirrhosis bit? It seems to be habitual that clinicians like to write that somebody has a problem with drink and that's why they have the cirrhosis. You hear this in the hearings, and also they actually did this to, they wrote this in Angus's father's notes at all. And I have to say, I never ever saw Angus's father ever drink at home, ever, never did, and he hardly went out the house. So it seemed to be that one clinician writes in something and they all tend to pick up it and decide to continue to write that afterwards. And so I just have to, I have to make that very clear, that I just feel that the blame of the cirrhosis, it was very evidently the hepatitis C, but they were passing it on to alcohol. He could not have been a horologist. He had a firm hand. I'm surprised I've got one at the moment, but he had an absolute firm hand, and he couldn't afford not to have that for his career.
2006, Angus underwent treatment. How was he during that time?
Oh, it was like one of his friends actually said to me one day, it was like The Walking Dead. He was pale, he was thin, he had no personality, as I say, Angus was full of life, always laughing, always joking. And everybody fell in love with him, he was charming. But at that time when he was going through the medication, he was just a different person. Of course, he wouldn't eat, and he was very sick, and mood swings. It was awful for him. But he was persistent. Angus was a very strong character, and he was adamant. I've never known anybody that wanted to live so much, and he continued to take the treatment. He went all the way through it, and he still worked, and I don't know how he did it. Once in a while we'd have to call him in sick, but he was a proud man.
Towards the end of the treatment, by May 2007, he'd finished the round of treatment, and he sent an email to his treating doctor. If we can have 1001-008, please. The email at the bottom. Sorry for the late reply, only I've just returned yesterday from the States and am getting, I think it should say, ready to return to China. I'm scared in calling you that you're going to tell me the hep is back or I have cancer. Please reply and advise what the problem is, and then I'll call you. I don't think I could handle bad news at the moment with my brother on the treatment and the scandal of the NHS in all the papers. Regards, Angus. Were you aware that was how Angus was feeling by May 2007?
Yes, I was. We were very, very close. He always tried to be strong in front of me, and we always tried to be positive and always prayed for a miracle. But yeah, of course, he was just beside himself with worry, especially after he'd lost his father, and then Mark was on the treatment, and he was scared.
Unfortunately, we can see from the email above that the virus had come back. He wasn't in remission at that point. Angus then had a battle for a further course of treatment to be funded. What can you tell us about that?
Well, of course, it was devastating news to be informed that his treatment had not worked, and the hepatitis C was still there. So, of course, he wanted to go through another treatment, and he was told that wasn't possible. They didn't have the funding. So Angus wrote to our MP at the time who actually was really very good and was always very prompt in answering Angus with his letters, etc. And indeed, he pushed for Angus with our local PCT to have further treatment, and it was approved.
Throughout this time, as you say, Angus had kept working, but in November 2007 he resigned.
Yes, he did.
Why was that?
He just couldn't take it anymore. He was in a really high-pressure job, and he was travelling an awful lot, and he was tired, and he was scared, and he wanted to be at home, and he wanted to be with me. We wanted to be together, and I said to him, just leave it, go, give up, stop what you're doing. We'll manage. We'll get through it. So he left his employment.
And financially, what was the impact of this for the two of you?
It was huge. He had a fabulous position, and he'd worked very hard in his career. And he was a senior member of a very big company in the UK. So the impact was massive, of course, on the money that was coming in every month.
He just started up his own business and was trying to get things up and running, but he'd also applied to the Department for Work and Pensions.
Well, he did. Well, what actually happened was we talked about him resigning. I said, yeah, absolutely, you must. And at the time, I was fortunate. I did have a good job, and so I could cover to a point. Of course, you live by your means, so we were used to having Angus's income coming in. We knew we had to start to make some adjustments in our life, and so he said, "Well, okay, if I really should look at being self-employed, and then I can work when I want to, etc." And he sent the feelers out to different people and said, "I've left. I'm open for business." And within days, he had quite a few of his previous customers and people that were selling to the company that he was working for, and said, "Oh, music to our ears. We've wanted to work with you for a long time." And he was inundated with offers of contract work. And so, for a while before he fell really ill, he was able to work. But it wasn't until that he really couldn't work that we decided to seek funding, some sort of help.
During this time of your marriage, you'd made the decision not to have children. Can you tell us of the ongoing impact of that on you? I can read something from your statement if you prefer. Angus and I very much wanted to have a child. However, after discussing this at length, I decided not to. Neither of us knew what the future would hold for Angus, and it would be more responsible not to. Therefore, because of the hepatitis C infection and also the uncertainty of Angus's future life, we decided not to have any children together. Whilst this was probably a sensible decision, it was totally devastating for me, as I've never had children and desperately wanted to have a child with Angus. Angus already had 3 children when we met, but he did also very much want to have one with me, if it was possible. You've alluded to it a moment ago, but early 2008, Angus became very unwell and was diagnosed with liver cancer.
He was.
If you want a break,
No, I'm fine. Thank you.
You sure?
Thank you for asking. Yeah, thank you.
no.
Angus was diagnosed with liver cancer.
He was. Yeah.
You're concerned that there was a delay in that diagnosis.
Yes,
Can you tell us about that?
I believe there was. Angus actually was at the Royal Free Hospital in September, and in his notes, it's actually pointed out that when he came to clinic that day, he was very jaundiced and didn't appear to be very well. And to me, that's not rocket science. there was something clearly wrong. You know, when Angus's father died, there didn't seem to be any urgency to really watch Angus. You know, it was evident afterwards that his father died of hepatitis and then had cancer. But there didn't seem to be any urgency to you know, every 3 months pull Angus in for scans or biopsies or anything at all. And in September, he went in and, it was clearly noted by one of his doctors that he was looking jaundiced and well. And I just don't understand to this day why they didn't take that any further. They just didn't act on it at all.
And he wasn't diagnosed until early the following year.
It was we'd actually been away, and he wasn't at all well when we were away, and so it was just I think it was 3 days after 2 or 3 days after we got back, something like that. Angus was always reluctant to go to the hospital towards the end of his life, but I persisted, and indeed we in the end went to A&E. He had edemas. He was very swollen in his body and some cold sores, and just very fatigued and very tired. And it was found a couple of days later that he then had liver cancer.
Angus was told he wasn't eligible for a liver transplant.
Mm.
What was the impact of that on Angus?
Oh, he was devastated, but and then of course that sinks in, and then of course you get really angry. The hospital knew the history of his father, and yet history seemed to be repeating itself with Angus, and nobody had taken any diligence or any care of monitoring him. And I do wonder, you know, Angus was refused a liver transplant apparently due to the Milan criteria, because his tumour was too big and he had too many. And I always ask myself, if they had scanned Angus in the September when it was very apparent that he wasn't well, would they have then found the cancer? And we don't know. This is me clutching at straws, really. But indeed, you know, if he had have had the cancer, would he have then fitted into the Milan criteria? So then he could have been put on the transplant list. But they left it far too late, and indeed it wasn't until he became unwell and we actually went into A&E that he was told he had cancer.
Angus underwent embolisation and was very unwell. You've said there were difficulties with getting the embolisation appointments.
Well, Angus was admitted, and it seemed to take an age, really, for them to actually confirm to Angus that he had cancer. And they were doing lots of different scans, and they were always very hesitant to say, Angus, you had cancer. We think it might be, but we're not sure, which is very strange. And so then they said, no, you know, you have cancer, and Angus, he left the hospital, we went home, and then we had to obviously wait for a follow-up to know what was going to happen. And where we used to have to chase constantly, you know, well, what actions do we take next? What can we do next? And there was nothing. So, yeah, we had to, I know I wrote and Angus wrote and emailed, and gosh, Angus, I think, had managed to, he was such a charmer, he managed to get the mobile telephone number, I think, of everybody in that hospital, so he was constantly texting, constantly emailing. But we had to really push for the appointment for him to go in and have the embolisations.
Then in May 2008, you were told that a liver from a live donor was available as part of a domino transplantation procedure.
Mm-hmm.
How did Angus respond to that news?
Well, of course, to him it was a lifeline, and he had to take it, he had to grasp it. And so he did. But, you know, the liver that he was given was from a live donor. So it was a domino procedure. So, and the liver that Angus was given was from a patient who was suffering with amyloides. So Angus was actually given, and I don't want to sound ungrateful, but a liver that was not healthy in itself. Otherwise, the other patient wouldn't be having a new liver. So that patient was actually having a liver from a cadaver. But, you know, Angus said to me in that, I'm probably not going to be here in a couple of months' time. We have to take this chance. And so it was totally his decision. And he said, no, I really have to go with this.
And initially, the transplant was a success.
Mm.
And what was Angus told about the hepatitis C after the transplant?
That it was no longer apparent.
Then in April 2010, Angus was in the hospital and was reading his notes. And he saw that the hepatitis C had returned. Until that time, had Angus ever been told in person or by letter that the hepatitis C had returned?
No.
Please can we have document 30940012? It's an exhibit, thank you. We can see on the top right corner, clinic date, 20th of April 2010. So in accordance with what your recollection is of Angus finding the note. And then if we go down into the body of the letter, we can see that it says, I saw this patient today in clinic with my colleague, Dr. Rowlands at Welwyn Garden City. He was upset to hear that his HCV was positive, having been told that his HCV RNA was negative previously. In fact, going back through his results on one of our reporting systems, there are 2 instances where his HCV RNA was reported as negative, with a positive level in between times. So as far as Angus was concerned, he hadn't been told anything about this until he saw it. No. And it was at this clinic that it was raised by Angus himself.
He was looking through his notes, as I say, you know, he didn't, at this point, well, way before this, he really didn't trust anybody. And we used to have to lug his notes around from department to department because he had so much going on. And yeah, indeed, one day we were sitting I was actually in the waiting room, I think, and he was flicking through and he said, oh my God, the hepatitis is back, nobody told me. Until he read it.
From the time of his transplant through to January 2012, which we'll come to in a moment, what was Angus's health like?
He really reacted well to the transplant. And he just always wanted to prove everybody wrong. You know, he wanted to beat the record of being the person with a transplant that was going to get out of the hospital the quickest, you know. And the physio would come around and say, Angus, climb 1 step of stairs, and he'd climb 3. You know, just, and it was fabulous, and he had a new lease of life. Yeah, we thought that he would live to a lovely age.
In January 2012, Angus was diagnosed with lung cancer. He was due to have surgery on the 7th of February 2012 to obtain a sample to see what was going on. Mm-hmm. What happened with that surgery?
Well, to cut to the chase, it was cancelled. The surgeon, who actually became a very good friend, and it just showed Angus's personality. He actually had just come out of theatre, and he flopped himself on Angus's bed and said, I can't believe what I'm about to tell you. And he said, your operation has been cancelled. And Angus obviously asked why. And it was actually Mr. Eric Lim, who was fabulous. He is a superb surgeon. And he said, Angus, the management have deemed you at high risk. So he said, okay, what, because of hepatitis? He said, no, CJD. So I'm not allowed to operate on you here. And this was at the Royal Brompton Hospital.
In your statement, you had thought that it was the Royal Free where some of that had gone on, and so the inquiry put the statement to the Royal Free. We've had a response from Deborah Pollard from the Royal Free Hospital, in which she says it was not a decision of the Royal Free, it was a decision of the Royal Brompton, and that is now being put to the Brompton Hospital. But she's also provided an email from in relation to this. It's 30940017, and it's the second page of it. The particular doctor involved in this has got their name redacted at this stage because, of course, we've only just received the email and it needs to be dealt with through the criticisms process. But the email to Dr. Lim says this: "Thank you for your recent email regarding yesterday's frozen section in this complex case." That was the operation that Angus was due to have. "I completely understand and am sorry for the distress delaying this procedure has caused the patient. However, this situation is extremely unusual and outside the experience of our laboratory. Given the risks of infection to members of our staff associated with performing frozen sections, we had to ensure we made an informed decision as to whether or not we could perform a frozen section on this patient's tissue in our laboratory. The preliminary advice we obtained in the time available yesterday morning was that a frozen section should not be performed." Then further down, "I understand the patient's status as at risk of VCJD has been provided by his haemophilia centre, and I presume this is as outlined in the 2010 HPA document re-VCJD, which categorises patients having been treated with certain blood products between 1980 and 2001 as at risk of VCJD without further distinction." And then the doctor goes on to suggest a different methodology, a different operation that could be done, a way of dealing with the samples that would be obtained. And just before that email, there is also, on the first page of it, a note from Angus to Deborah Pollard, saying, "I'm still having the operation next Tuesday," so it had been postponed. "I must say, Deborah, I'm now finding the whole thing rather hard to swallow at the moment." You said in your statement that you and Angus were outraged.
Oh, we were completely disgusted. Angus, not only was he infected with hepatitis C, at that time we didn't know if he'd been infected by CJD, and he was infected by the Department of Health, National Health, whoever, and they were not taking responsibility for their actions at all. So yeah, we just couldn't believe what was happening. But the doctor fought, and indeed Angus did get his operation.
In relation to the VCJD, I want to just ask you a couple of questions about the documents in Angus's records that you're now aware of. It takes us back, initially back to 1997, 1001-024. This was the letter that Angus got in on the 3rd of December 97 from Professor Christine Lee, Dr. Passy and Dr. Perry, indicating that you may have heard or read about CJD and the concerns that the agent causing this may be transmitted by blood transfusion and blood products. At the present time, there is no evidence for this. The basis for scientific speculation is that the new form of CJD, new variant CJD, infects the lymphocytes, a type of white cells which are found in the blood. blood products used for the treatment of inherited bleeding disorders do not contain white cells. As a consequence of these concerns and as a precautionary measure, there have been 2 recent recalls of BPL factor 8 batches because it was found that a donor had not met the current health requirements for CJD. According to our records, you've never been treated with these batches. And then it explains that the issues are complex and that they would ensure that further information would be provided.
I don't at the moment understand the first paragraph, because it seems to be saying that the new form of CJD infects the lymphocytes, type of white cells which are found in the blood. Blood products don't contain white cells. That's not the issue, is it? The issue was whether blood products transfer whatever it is that is damaging the lymphocytes in the bloodstream.
Precisely, sir.
So it's not really answering the question that it was supposed to be answering, is it?
That's one way of reading it, sir.
Well, I'll be interested to know what other ways there are of reading it in due course.
So I was trying to be entirely neutral because it's obviously something we'll need to investigate further.
Yes.
And then if we go to 026, 1001 026, we have a form that Angus has filled in November 2004, where he said that he does want confirmation of whether he received UK-sourced plasma in person. He would like to know if he received an implicated batch, and he would not like a specific consultation to discuss the implications of the issue.
Can I just mention, I think the reason why he didn't want an appointment was because it took forever and a day to get one. And, Angus was always on the phone or emailing, so specifically to me, he wanted an immediate response to this. He wasn't prepared to wait for an appointment. And indeed, it follows later.
So if we go to 1001 027, the first page is an email from Angus to Professor Lee, just checking that his forms had been received. The following page, on the 6th of December 2004, we have an email from Christine Lee saying, I have not seen these forms. And on the same day, the following page, Paul, please, 6th of December 2004, an appointment's been arranged for him to see her on the 19th of January, despite him having said he did not want an appointment. And then the following page, on the 15th of December 2004, so before the appointment, he receives in writing confirmation that he had received UK-sourced plasma, and the following letter that he had not received an implicated batch. So in 2004, the information that Angus had received was he had not received an implicated batch, and yet, as you say, in 2012, that was the reason why they postponed his operation.
Seems so.
Following the operation in February 2012, it was confirmed that the tumour in the lung was cancerous.
Mm-hmm.
And Angus went on to develop secondary tumours.
He did.
Can you tell us a little bit more of what happened to Angus?
Yeah, I mean, it was very invasive and very quick. Initially, Angus had the lower lobe taken away from his left lung, and we hoped that the cancer hadn't seeded and spread. And indeed, he was discharged from the Royal Brompton because his scans and everything seemed okay. And then it was sometime after that he had a general scan on one of his checkups, and he had some shadows in his lungs. And it wasn't just the left lung where he'd previously had the cancer, it was in both. and it was very apparent that it was everywhere.
And it had gone into his shoulder, his arm.
Oh yes,
bone.
it then extended to his hip, and he had radiotherapy for his hip, and his shoulder. Indeed, he had a tumour that was literally the size of a grapefruit, and you could literally see this growing every other day. You know, it just got bigger and bigger. And also it affected the bone in his arm as well, and it was just destroying and deteriorated all of the bone in his left arm.
And you think he may well have had a brain tumour as well because of the headaches?
He was complaining of headaches before he passed away, yeah. You know, sort of 5-6 weeks before he passed, yeah.
You've described that the physical pain Angus was in was horrendous.
It was terrible. And Angus didn't react very well to opiate medication, and so he always, you know, refused that, and he was sent to the pain clinic, and he was prescribed other types of medication, but it got to a point where it actually really didn't help.
And he had some chemotherapy.
Oh, he had chemotherapy. He had radiotherapy, which was really invasive and brutal. You know, he had burns actually, where he'd had the radiotherapy, and it actually got rid of the tumour on his back and in his hip. But he did go on a course of, I think it was Volfox actually, which at first seemed to it destroyed some of the tumours and stopped the growth of some of the others, but it wasn't without him having side effects.
And those side effects were particularly devastating for Angus because they affected his eyesight.
Yes, they did.
And he lost feeling in his fingertips.
Yeah, he lost. They did say that the duration of Angus having the chemotherapy, that he would probably feel sensations of pins and needles, and he'd feel the cold, and certain drinks that to be careful what he was drinking, cold liquids, etc., and that he'd be super sensitive, and that those may not go away, those side effects. And with Angus, it didn't. His sight really deteriorated, and he lost the feeling in his fingertips, which was really important to him as a horologist. And at that time, he wasn't working, but it was a hobby that he liked to do. It kept him busy. He loved it. He devoted his life to studying and working to be a horologist. And when he was really unwell, he would love to sit in his office, and he'd had this lovely horologist workbench made and designed for him. And it was a way, put the radio on, and it was a way for him to just forget about what's happening. And he couldn't do that anymore.
You said that he had a huge impact on his mental state as well.
It did. He always tried to be positive, and when he went to the hospital, it was an act. But as soon as we'd get in the car, we'd get home, he was he'd be in pieces about the situation. Yeah.
Angus deteriorated very significantly in October 2013 with a gastrointestinal bleed. And he wanted you to take a photo of him when
He did.
he knew he was near the end.
Yeah, he never had any faith in any of the campaigns or inquiries. This is just Angus. He said nothing's ever going to happen. Nothing seems to be ever happening. But if there ever is a chance that an inquiry will come out, you need to record what's been happening. So we did. We took photographs of him all the time when he was in hospital with different treatments, operations, etc. And he did ask me to take a photograph, and it was 10 days before he passed away.
If you feel comfortable,
Yes,
we'll show
sorry.
it. 1001-018, please. This was taken 10 days before he died. And Angus died on the 28th of December 2013.
He did.
Can you tell us something of the impact of Angus's death on you and and the family?
Well, very obviously, it completely devastated us. And we none of us were expecting him to die so quickly, and it was a shock to all of us, quite frankly, when he did. I don't know if any of us really accepted that he would die. There's always hope that some miracle again would happen. Of course, it broke the family, especially the Stewart family. Their father died and Angus died. Of course, Mark was infected. And my family were completely devastated. My father, who is a funny, charismatic Scotsman, didn't go out the house for about 3 weeks. We were really worried about him, and he said he felt he'd lost his son, but he had. And when Angus died, I just felt I had to be dignified and together to make sure that, he was very specific in his funeral arrangements and what he wanted, and I wanted to make sure that was carried out properly. And then people were just breaking apart around me, and I felt strong. I felt I had to be strong for them, and so and I was still in shock, and it didn't really affect me for some months afterwards.
But then several months later, it hit you.
Yeah, I went back to my employment part-time at first, and in March, probably far too quickly. Angus had passed away in December, and but I continued with my job and continued to succeed. In fact, I had to throw myself into that, and of course I was the breadwinner then, and I had to keep our lovely home that was expensive. We bought it together, and it was just me on my own. I wanted to keep everything together, and I was seemingly doing so, and then I think my mind was on autopilot, and my body just gave in, and I suffered skin conditions, etc., and it really then started to take its toll.
And you gave up your own job?
I did in 2016, and I was Executive Vice President of a public limited company, and it was a huge role. I'd been with the business for 17 years, and nothing really mattered anymore. I just wanted to find a different way of coping with life, and the day-to-day dramas, silly dramas of a business really didn't fulfill me anymore. And so I decided to hand in my notice.
Before I ask you if there's anything else you want to say, I'm just going to turn and ask Mr. Collins. Is there anything else you'd like to say?
I'm going to try and read something that just to talk about Angus and the person he was, really. And one of Angus actually asked one of his friends if he would write his eulogy. Angus prepared his funeral, and so his friend said, "Of course I will." And this gentleman was French descendant, but everybody who knows Angus will say to you he had the driest, funniest sense of humour. And I have to finish on something, but it's also very sentimental to a point. So I'd written to our friend after the funeral and said, "Oh, thank you very much for a fabulous eulogy." And Angus used to talk to him an awful lot about history, and he came from French lineage, and Angus Scottish, and they used to joke about that quite a lot. So anyway, I thanked Christopher, and he said, "Annette, I'm sure on reflection I could have done much better, as there is plenty to say about Angus. But if you want, voila, here you go." And his eulogy read, Angus was charismatic, indomitable, courageous, witty, intelligent, determined, canny, and much besides. The mark of a man. As a haemophiliac, he suffered from a disease that was compounded by the tainted blood, which gave him hepatitis C, or hep C as he described it, then liver cancer, lung cancer, and bone cancer. Most human beings with afflictions of this sort would have been broken psychologically long before the diseases overcame them, but not so with Angus. He never surrendered. Despite the frequency of invasive medical treatments and pain and suffering, he remained hopeful. He fought the illnesses all the way, buoyed up by massive strength and incredible spirit, and the support and love of Annette and his family. He then says, "I'm told his forebearers were the Stewarts of Appin, a band of Scottish clansmen celebrated for their fighting instincts and their physical prowess. He was a big man and larger than life itself. And Christopher says, may I read you an email that he sent me back in August last year, which shows his humour despite the gravity of his situation. Just in case you wonder, he's alluding to my French origins. Yes, fella, I'm full of chemo. They usually only give 85% dosage to re-challenged patients. But I told them I could handle the full 100% again. It's tough, but it's got to be done. Just mad jock of juice in these veins. See you soon, my small French ally. And then he goes on to talk about lots of historic things. And he said, you learn something bit useless every day, right? Then Christopher says, I met Angus when he worked for the company he worked for. He was a horologist and a metallurgist of repute, writing papers for the BSI standards and for the EEC. Angus had a huge zest for life. He loved good cuisine, conversation and travel. And he and Annette embarked every 3 months on exotic locations all over the globe. And he especially enjoyed Hong Kong and admired the Chinese culture and lifestyle. In September last year, he emailed me about his situation. Hi, Christopher. We saw the oncologist and the liver consultant today. There is no cure for this type of cancer. They're going to start radiation treatment to reduce the bone tumour in my shoulder. They are then going to start me on a chemo that will try and stop or at least slow the spread of the cancer. We are positive that at least this gives us some more time together. Christopher, you have been a good friend, and I just want you to know that. I hope to see you again, as I will keep fighting until the end. And then he read a lovely poem, which I don't think I can bring myself to read at this moment. But what I have to say is very short and sweet. And I have numerous questions, especially as I've now fully believed that Angus was patient number 19 on a clinical research paper, as just evidenced by his brother, Mark Stewart. Angus was given a product in the 1980 already deemed unsafe. Indeed, 100% of patients apparently would be infected. The clinicians knew this. I call this manslaughter. The pharmaceutical companies who manufactured the blood products were greedy and humane, we know that. But the ministers, the Department of Health and the clinicians who continued to purchase and use contaminated blood products when they knew they were infected must be held accountable and fully investigated. These departments and people had a duty to assist the sick. Instead, in my view, they killed them. For decades, a web of lies and deceit has been spun. We do not want lame apologies or excuses. We want the truth, we deserve the truth, and we need justice.
You've given your evidence in a very calm and measured way, but I suspect that that masks a very real and deep and raw feeling. And so it must have been, at times, particularly difficult for you. Thank you very much indeed for giving your evidence.
Thank you.
Well, we'll take a break till 20 to 4, when we'll hear from Baroness Campbell.
Thank you.
20 to 4.